As with the other modules, I provided you sort of a big picture diagram of the food system. Uh, in the case of green building and sites, it was more of a diagram of the history of the green building movement because building systems and energy systems um, have an important history, so I want to make sure I pointed that out to you. It's much younger than our modern food system. And matter of fact, the sustainable food system is a reinvention of the past. So in this diagram, I decided to focus on something more like what you saw in that first diagram about renewable energy, where you have a production side of food and then you've got a consumption side of food. But in the case of the food system, as you just learned in our discussion of the definition of a food system, there are a lot of moving parts. So let's walk through some of those in the context of this diagram. Let's divide this diagram up into its major components. The top one would be the drivers. That would be this top part of this circle. And notice this is a circle. In the Earth Systems class, we talked about how we want our Earth systems to operate the way they were naturally designed to operate, and that is in a system of exchanging constant matter and energy, and instead of throwing things away, throwing things outside of this cycle. And so we have the drivers on the top, and all the drivers are defined by these little sub-images. We have an emphasis on people. We have an emphasis on money and people characteristics that make up markets, that define how we distribute income and that define who we allow to work. We don't allow children to work, for example. Then we have this socio-cultural focus, which relates to how we influence each other and the way we behave. Social norms define what's normal, and our values define what we're willing to eat. Everybody's not willing to eat a pig's ear anymore, for example. But in China, they eat every part of the animal imaginable. So socio-cultural dynamics and our knowledge and our preferences within that concept are big drivers of the food system. And of course, the environment, the physical environment, the resources that are available to us, and then how climate and weather affect food production. Geopolitical is sort of juxtaposed against policy. I like that because geopolitical has to do with geographic policy, geographically specific policy, and the exchanges that go between those. So international trade, whether or not a country is stable, whether or not they're involved in nationalism, only trading within themselves, or whether they're participating in globalization. And then over here on the far left, the policy that defines that tends to be a little more place-based, when it comes to how we keep food safe, how we separate cities from food-producing areas or integrate them in the case of urban farming, how we deal with taxes and subsidies and land rights and food security, food availability and food safety. But not all of these policies will necessarily function in every geopolitical environment, just as we found out with cultural and socioeconomic drivers. And of course, technology and science, right here in the middle, partners a lot with the environment and is really what drives the efficiency of our production system, new ways of producing food, new genes or old genes, as it were, combined in different ways, and the agricultural practices, which are outlined in the table that you'll see in a few minutes. So these are all of our drivers. And then these drivers function in a cycle to create outcomes. And these outcomes can come in different stages. As you remember, the simple diagram of a stock and flow system is linear, moves from left to right. You have a flow in, you have a stock, you have a flow out. So if you look over here to the left, you can see pre-production, which is ag practices, genetic resources, and agriculture inputs. Some of these drivers have created some of these characteristics of pre-production. And then we have production and food loss management associated with production. So we have growing and harvesting, and there can be lots of waste on farms and fishery farms and with workers and with wildlife. So we have lots of dynamics associated with the production of food. And then we have the processing of that food, the direct supply chain, farmers markets, and the big conventional supply chain where we transform it and package it and ship it and transport it and wholesale it and retail it to people. And there are all kinds of players in that. And there's a lot of food waste that goes on in there as well. If it doesn't look the way people think it does and they think it should look in our modern supermarkets, it gets thrown out even when it's perfectly good food. And of course then we have the consumption side, which includes households and institutions and restaurants where we cook and eat. And then of course some of the outcomes are affected by an integration of the drivers of socioeconomics, food security and nutrition, and environment, which influence these. And so these drivers affect these drivers, which affects the process of stocks and flows, and then the process continues and keeps replenishing itself and stays regenerative if it stays sustainable.